clearly, because you've actually allowed us plenty of time to kickstart. And I'm sure we'll come back to a lot more discussion of the specifics at the time of the Q&A. So thank you for that. I'd like to move on to our next speaker, Dr. Eimir McGrath. And Eimir is a consultant psychotherapist. She works with both children and adults who both have and do not have various disabilities. And her special area of interest and in work is those with attachment, complex trauma, and dissociative disorders. By way of expertise and background, Eimir is a founder member and the current convener of the Disability Psychotherapy Ireland. And I guess maybe in your talk, Eimir, you might talk whether that is developed from the UK Institute of Psychotherapy and Disability, of which you're still currently a secretary there. You're also co-director of the Relatability Centre, and through that you provide consultancy, external psychotherapy and clinical.
Sorry, Fiona, you're just on mute there.
I was trying to figure out, is that me not hearing?
Yeah, I think you might have muted me. Maybe that's Freudian. Eimir, I was attesting to your expertise by way of your relationship with the Disability Psychotherapy Ireland, and also as secretary of the Institute of Psychotherapy and Disability in the UK. And your broad range of expertise by way of academic writing, provision of psychotherapy clinically and supervision, and also consultancy work. And you're co-director of the Relatability Centre. So in terms of your transdisciplinary PhD research, which focused on a number of broad areas, the intersection of critical disability studies, the neurobiology of relationships, the contemporary attachment theory, and inclusive dance performance. It's a myriad of areas. And your talk tonight, I think, brings it back to the central place, which you've titled Home, Safe Home, Belonging, Displacement and Trauma. So thank you very much, Eimir. I will mute myself now and looking forward to your talk.
Okay, thank you very much, Fiona. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. And I'm going to move my little box out of the way. So thank you for that lovely introduction. And yes, to answer your question, in terms of DPI was originally set up by a small group of people. I was invited to join that group, and I think it was very much our common denominator was the wonderful Dr. Alan Corbett, who sadly died several years ago, a great loss to the psychotherapy community, to disability psychotherapy, and to the world. I think he's been a huge influence on my development as a disability psychotherapist, and I think I can speak for quite a few other people in Ireland as well. So yeah, my connection was through Alan that I was drawn into the IPD and also into making connection with other people in Ireland. And I'll name them: Teresa Merrigan, Helen Crowley, and Angelina Vega, who all were very passionate and committed to developing disability psychotherapy in Ireland. And that was our wonderful core group that it came from. And my specializing in disability psychotherapy was a little bit of just happenstance. It wasn't something I intended doing, but I've been working in this area now for the past 20 years or so. And I think when I chose to talk about, I heard what the other people were talking about, and I heard that there was going to be some talk about people who are trafficked and slavery. And thinking in terms of that, and with what's very present in all our lives at the moment, where we've had a pandemic, the war in Ukraine, I began to think of the notion of home and belonging, displacement, and how trauma fits into that. So rather than home sweet home, I decided to talk about home safe home, because the notion of safety is core to our existence. And the notion of displacement is something that I think we need to think about very carefully within the field of disability. And just to say a little bit about, as you can see, that I've chosen, homes are defined by not necessarily the different kind of walls that surround us, because they are myriad, but by what actually happens within that space. Because home to us is a place where we can either experience safety or unsafety, where hopefully, if our home is safe, if we are seen with loving eyes, it helps us to develop the ability to emotionally regulate. We develop the power to engage socially, which is where human beings are social beings. We need other people. And through that, we develop resilience. Sorry, I'm having a little difficulty here yes, there we go. So I started off with thinking about vulnerability and thinking about people with disabilities in the broader sense, in the larger world, where they may be facing conflict, facing war situations, facing trafficking. And I loved what Grove et al. Said, that vulnerability is a product of a complex interaction of social, and I can't see the rest of my writing because I have to move my little box, social structures, rather than an essential constituent of intellectual disability. And I think this is such an important concept for us to hold, that the vulnerability is something we all share as humans, and it depends on the people around us, developing our inner resources from the very beginning of our lives that decide how much vulnerability we have and how we can cope in terms of resilience when that vulnerability is not being met with care and support. So it's not an essential constituent of intellectual disability. And with that in mind, I really am having problems here with, this is a new system I'm using, so you'll have to excuse my little blips here. Chirimovich talking with the Red Cross was, he actually spoke about what happens to people with disabilities, that they have difficulties in fleeing attacks, they risk abandonment, there's a breakdown in services, education and community support networks, and it disproportionately impacts people with disabilities. He also mentioned stigma and abuse, and then the ongoing trauma and psychological distress during and after armed conflicts. And Yousefian also speaks about the level of stigma and ignorance is increased at times of war or at times of conflict. And so people with intellectual disabilities are put at much higher risk of being left behind and also of experiencing violence and abuse. I moved from that onto thinking of the word displacement and the notion of trauma, the trauma that comes from displacement. And like Caroline, I have my own way of thinking about trauma, which we all share. And here are my words for trauma, is an individual's experience that overwhelms both the internal and the external ability to cope and to protect the self from harm. So no two traumas are the same. Each trauma is unique to the person who experiences it, because it's an overwhelm that it's an overwhelm that's affecting your ability to cope and your ability to protect yourself. And thinking of the trauma of displacement, if you look for a definition of displace, to shift from its accustomed place. And I was struck by that phrase, you know, the accustomed place, what we're used to, the situation in which people are forced to leave the place where they normally live. There's a dictionary definition. Displaced person, someone who's been forced to leave their home because of war or natural disaster. Displacement, conflict, war, natural disaster. Also, if you think in a more micro sense, rather than the macro sense of a world of war, the death of a primary carer, where somebody needs to be rehoused. And I would prefer to think in terms of rehoming, because they're not losing the four walls, they're losing their sense of safety and belonging. External factors can affect whether somebody loses their home and loses that sense of belonging. It can be a change of service, a move into residential care, age-related moves when a child has to be moved from child services to adult services at 18, organisational logistics, and we've all lived through decongregation and what that means. Changes of peers, changes of residents within a residential setting, loss of residential staff or MDT members or anybody that that person has made an attachment with that they are now losing. So what is it we need that helps us to repair this enormous loss, the sense of displacement, and the pain that comes with not having the security of home? We need a sense of belonging, and that comes from our inbuilt need for attachment, which from an evolutionary point of view starts at the very moment that life starts. It's actually, we now know that it's pre-birth, it's in utero, that first connection is made, that first human connection between the mother and the child. And our brains are designed in an evolutionary way, and it's touching a little bit on what Caroline has already said, that the most primitive part of our brain, the brainstem, is all around survival. Am I safe? Am I unsafe? And our brains are constantly scanning our environments and our situations and our emotional condition so that we can judge, am I safe right now? Am I not safe? It's a basic requirement of survival. And it is very closely linked with our limbic system, which is the center for attachment and emotional development and our emotional world. And it's in these parts of the brain that trauma is stored as frozen feelings that haven't been able to be processed, feelings of fear, memories of things that have happened that have overwhelmed. And then, of course, we have the cortical brain, which is the seat of thinking and learning. So everything cortical is our cognitive ability, and subcortical is around, it's a little bit of an oversimplification, but it helps in where I'm going in keeping with that oversimplification. Because what happens when somebody has lost everything in terms of their sense of safety and their home and what home means to them? And that brings me to the window of tolerance, because regardless of what our role is, this is how we can help ourselves. This is how we can help other people. This is the fundamental understanding of how to overcome that feeling of overwhelm. We all want to stay with what we aim for is staying within a window of tolerance, a state called homeostasis, which is always temporary. It's never a permanent thing, because when we're in our window of tolerance, we're socially engaged, we're curious, we're calm, we're alert, and most importantly, we're safe. We have a sense of safety. If you lose that, if you become dysregulated, if you begin to feel unsafe, you can go into hyperarousal, which is where you're extremely anxious, you're angry, you feel threatened, you're into fight flight, and there's the volcano demonstrating that. Or you can go downwards into hypoarousal, where you are frozen, you're numb, you're disconnected, shut down, and then at the most extreme, you go into a state of even physiological collapse in terms of fainting, or you go into a mind state of collapse, which at its extreme is dissociation. So when somebody is displaced, when they have lost their sense of home and belonging, and that needs to be re-established, the first thing we need to do is find ways to soothe their nervous system. This is all based on the work of Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, which I don't have time to go into tonight, but I'm just naming it there. What we do is, how can we soothe somebody's nervous system to bring them back into their window of tolerance? Because if they're hyper or hypo-aroused, their window of tolerance gets smaller and smaller. By soothing, by introducing a sense of safety, we're helping them to grow their window of tolerance and increasing the ability to actually feel safe and be able to engage, be curious, be calm, be alert. When somebody is dysregulated, they cannot regulate themselves, because the first thing that happens, as Caroline alluded to, is there is a disconnection between the cortical action of the cortical brain and the subcortical brain. We don't waste time and energy on thinking when we're in survival mode. That's evolutionary of, I'm being chased by a saber-toothed tiger and I don't have time to think of the logistics of what to do, I just react. So when somebody is dysregulated, they cannot think and they need external regulation. And this, I love Margaret Wilkinson's quote about, what do you do about that? You need to be in a state of attunement with that person, being aware of and responsive to another. It's absolutely fundamental to meaningful human interaction, all meaningful human interaction, and also to the therapeutic process. And perception and emotional learning in the area of attunement arise out of the earliest relating to each other. And if we think back to the slide I showed of a dad with his baby, there's the earliest moment of attunement, which is not based on words. It's not necessarily based on actions. It's based on being seen with loving eyes and developing a sense of self and a sense of safety because you are seen with loving eyes. And the wonderful thing about that, even for babies or children who didn't receive enough of that being seen with loving eyes and their inability to develop a full sense of self, it can be repaired. It can be repaired throughout the lifetime. There's never a too late moment. And the other most important thing to say about that is somebody with an intellectual disability, because they have a rich emotional life, consciousness is subcortical, and they have a rich emotional life. It does not depend on cognitive ability. This is available to everyone, even somebody with the most profound disability. We can think, because we have that cortical power, to develop our own anchors. What people bring me a feeling of safety? What actions invite connection with other people? When did I feel happy that I can remember? Because in remembering, I'm triggering all the same chemical reactions in my brain that give me the feeling of comfort that I experienced at that time. Where can I find comfort? Where can I feel safe? So for us, self-regulation is perhaps the most important contribution to the therapy world, Bessel van der Kolk, the king of trauma treatment, says, including the field of trauma, and can make to the wider culture is to give people greater access to their innate self-regulatory mechanisms, systems. And this is what I love: the way they move, the way they breathe, the way they sing, the way they interact with each other. There's connection that doesn't depend on words, that is regulatory for everybody. And I wish I had time to go into all of that now, I don't. And I'm just going to finish off by saying that what can you do when you're disconnected, when you're with somebody who's totally disconnected? You create a little moment of calm. And it's the simplest thing in the world. You don't think about breathing in or patterns of breathing. You simply breathe out slowly. If you have still the ability to think, you haven't completely dysregulated, you imagine your anchor. or you use your senses to look at a person who is helping, who's supporting you, to listen, to feel, to taste, whatever your senses can give you in that moment to soothe you and to help you reconnect within yourself and then reconnect with other people. And I would just, as a closing thought, invite everybody just to either look at my sunflower or create their own anchor, create your own anchor in your head, and just take a long, slow breath out and give yourself a little moment of calm. And in doing that, you are resetting your nervous system and you're connecting with calm, with safety, with reconnection and belonging. Thank you.
Eimir, thank you very much for that presentation.